If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing, Heathrow International Airport at 3 in the morning was a strange limbo. Cold lights illuminated rows of empty chairs while the muffled sound of cleaning machines echoed on the gleaming floor. An exhausted-looking man, unshaven and with a lost gaze, sat hunched on one of the benches in the waiting area. In his arms, a small pink backpack embroidered with colorful unicorns. Beside him, asleep in a fetal position, a 6-year-old girl with curly brown hair stirred from time to time, sensitive to subtle changes in light and distant sounds that no one else seemed to notice. Robert Nolan ran a hand over his tired eyes. Once his name graced the covers of business and technology magazines. The British startup genius, the London visionary, the entrepreneur who revolutionized the national digital market. These titles now sounded like distant echoes of a life that no longer belonged to him. His gaze shifted to his daughter, Lucy, who stirred as she felt her father's gentle touch on her forehead. "It's okay, Lulu," he whispered, using the nickname that always calmed the girl. "Daddy's here." Lucy was autistic. Her world was made of patterns, specific colors, and sounds that only she could organize. To others, an almost empty airport might seem quiet, but Robert knew that for his daughter, every air conditioning compressor, every distant announcement over the sound system, every hum of a fluorescent lamp was a stimulus that could trigger a sensory storm. The flight to Manchester had been cancelled due to bad weather. It was the third postponement in 2 days. Money was running out, and the job offer an old colleague had made him in the north seemed increasingly distant. Only a few crumpled notes remained in his wallet, enough to buy a snack and maybe pay for a taxi to some cheap hotel, if absolutely necessary. But every unplanned expense meant one less day of survival. As he adjusted his jacket over Lucy, his fingers touched the thin chain he still wore around his neck, Catherine's last gift before her unexpected goodbye. The rare disease that took his wife gave no time for elaborate farewells. Within months, his life partner and his daughter's mother was simply gone, and with her the ground beneath his feet also disappeared. On the other side of the departure lounge, Clara Miller watched discreetly. Dressed in jeans, a neutral top, and her hair tied in a discreet bun, she could easily pass for just another tired passenger. But her attentive eyes and always alert posture revealed her true function to anyone who knew how to observe. A federal police agent for 8 years, she was on a surveillance mission that had already lasted almost 48 hours. "Target remains in position. No suspicious movements," she whispered into the microphone camouflaged in her shirt collar. The reply came immediately through her discreet earpiece. "Maintain surveillance, reinforcements en route." 3 days earlier, the Federal Police Cyber Intelligence Unit had identified an encrypted device containing classified data from the Department of Defense. The tracking led to a name, Robert Nolan, the same man who now, dejected and seemingly harmless, cradled a sleeping child. The dossier Clara had received described Robert as an opportunistic, cold and calculating businessman who allegedly used his government contacts to gain access to privileged information. According to the preliminary investigation, he was planning to sell this data to foreign companies, compromising strategic British projects. But the man before her did not match that description. When Robert got up to go to the coffee machine, Clara took the opportunity to approach. The girl remained asleep, clutching her worn teddy bear. The agent pretended to look for something in her bag while observing the pink backpack under the bench, the most likely place to hide the device mentioned in the reports. "Damn it," Robert's voice echoed when the coffee machine swallowed his last coin without delivering the product. He gave the side of the machine a weak slap and leaned his forehead against the glass, closing his eyes in a gesture of pure defeat. Clara saw her chance. She approached casually. "These machines are terrible," she commented. "They seem to have a sixth sense for detecting who truly needs caffeine." Robert turned, surprised by the approach. His eyes were red, with deep, dark circles, but he still managed to force a polite smile. "I think they're programmed to identify broke people," he replied with a tired laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure there's a sensor for that." Clara laughed back, studying his every micro-expression. Years of training in behavioral analysis gave her an advantage in this type of interaction. "Are you waiting for the Manchester flight too?" she asked. "Yes, third cancellation. I'm starting to think the universe is trying to tell me something." He glanced at his daughter. "But I can't give up now." "Your daughter is beautiful," Clara commented, trying to extend the conversation. "How old is she?" "6, Robert replied, and his gaze immediately softened. "She's special. She has autism. This kind of situation is particularly difficult for her." "I imagine," Clara said, feeling an unexpected discomfort. That wasn't the typical reaction of a criminal under surveillance. "Are you traveling for tourism?" A bitter laugh escaped Robert's lips. "Not exactly. We're starting over. A friend in Manchester offered an opportunity. It's not much, but it's all we have right now." At that moment, Lucy stirred on the bench, reacting to a sudden announcement over the airport's sound system. Her little eyes opened in panic and her hands flew to cover her ears. Robert rushed to her, completely forgetting his conversation with Clara. He knelt in front of his daughter and gently held her small hands. "Low light, high hug, Lulu. Low light, high hug," he repeated like a mantra. To Clara's surprise, the girl responded immediately, lowering her hands and throwing herself into her father's arms, who embraced her protectively. It was a code between them, a magic phrase that meant safety. Observing that scene, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in a mission for a long time: doubt. The conviction that had guided her for days began to unravel before the genuine devotion of that father. There was something profoundly wrong with that investigation. She could feel it. But she still couldn't identify exactly what. Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket, a new encrypted message. "Device confirmed in target's possession. Prepare for extraction in 30 minutes. Clara looked once more at Robert and Lucy, now calm again. The girl nestled against her father's chest as he stroked her hair. The contrast between the image before her and the orders she had just received could not have been greater. For the first time in her career, Clara Miller hesitated. Chapter 2. Ruins of an Empire. 5 years earlier, Robert Nolan was the face of British technological innovation. His main company, Nova Code Solutions, occupied 3 floors of a glass-fronted building in Canary Wharf, London's financial heart. In those days, his days began with strategic meetings and ended with business dinners with international investors who came to the UK specifically to meet the British Steve Jobs, as some journalists like to call him. On a particularly busy afternoon, Robert received a call that would change his life. Catherine's voice sounded strangely restrained on the other end of the line. "The results are in, Rob," she said. "I need you to come home." He still remembered every detail of that day. The chaotic motorway traffic, the fine rain blurring the windshield, the melancholic music playing on the radio like a premonitory soundtrack. When he arrived home, in the upscale Richmond estate, he found Catherine sitting on the balcony, looking at the horizon with a calm that contrasted with the storm in her eyes. Hammond-Rich syndrome, a rare and progressive interstitial lung disease. The name sounded like an incomprehensible code in the mouth of the doctor who attended them in the following weeks. Experimental treatments, probability of response, limited life expectancy, terms that became pillars of the new reality being built around them. Lucy, only 2 years old at the time, sensed that something had changed, even without understanding the magnitude of the situation. Her recently diagnosed autism made the task of helping her process the changes occurring at home even more complex. Robert gradually reduced his presence at the company. Important meetings were delegated to directors, launches postponed, projects reviewed. Novacode, which had been growing at impressive rates, began to show signs of deceleration. Shareholders became uneasy. Partners began to question the company's direction. But none of this mattered to Robert, whose world now revolved between the hospital and his daughter's special needs. Catherine's treatment was experimental and expensive, absurdly expensive. The health plan covered only a fraction of the costs. Soon the couple was dipping into their savings. Then came the loans, the mortgages, the sale of personal assets. "Don't do it, Rob," Catherine pleaded one night when he mentioned selling his majority stake in Novacode. "You built this empire from scratch. It's your legacy." "Legacy?" He laughed without humor, holding his wife's fragile hand in his. "You and Lucy are my legacy. The rest is just structure." A month later, the official announcement: Robert Nolan sold 60% of his shares in Novacode to a group of investors led by his former partner, Paul Miller. The financial market buzzed with speculation. The press tried in vain to extract more substantial statements than the laconic press release sent by the press office. Behind the scenes, the deal was less advantageous than it seemed. The urgency of the situation had forced Robert to accept a value below market. The money, however, financed the couple's trip to the United States, where a promising treatment was in the final phase of clinical trials. Boston welcomed the Nolan family with an inclement winter, as cold as the probabilities the American doctors presented. For 3 months, Catherine underwent a rigorous protocol that consumed her strength, but fed hope. Lucy, displaced from her familiar environment and routine, manifested increasingly severe anxiety crises. Robert divided his time between the hospital and the rented apartment, where he tried to maintain some sense of normalcy for his daughter. When the treatment failed, the disappointment was devastating, but there was no time for lamentations. New protocols, new specialists, new attempts. The money, however, was draining at an alarming speed. Robert began to discreetly sell his properties in the UK, first the holiday apartment in Brighton, then the country house in the Lake District, and finally the main residence in Richmond. A year and a half after the initial diagnosis, the couple returned to the UK without the improvement they so longed for. The disease progressed inexorably, stealing Catherine's breath and, with it, Robert's hopes. In the following weeks, he still tried to rebuild himself professionally. He used his contacts to seek consulting contracts, proposed partnerships with old colleagues in the sector. Some were kind enough to offer occasional jobs. Others barely answered his calls, as if failure were contagious. It was around this time that Robert's path briefly crossed with the federal government. A former college colleague, now a high-ranking official in the Department of Science and Technology, invited him to participate in a public service digitalization project. The work paid reasonably well and lasted almost 6 months, enough time for Robert to learn the intricacies of state bureaucracy and gain access to information that, without realizing it, would put him in a compromising position in the future. When Catherine finally said goodbye to this world, on a rainy September afternoon, Robert was by her side, holding her hand. Her last words were a plea. "Take care of our girl, she only has you now." The funeral was discreet. Few friends attended. Most had distanced themselves during the long illness, unable to deal with the weight of others' suffering. Catherine's elderly parents tried to comfort their granddaughter, who did not fully understand what was happening, but deeply felt her mother's absence. It was Paul Miller, ironically, who approached Robert after the ceremony. The man who had bought his company for a fraction of its real value now offered condolences and, almost as an insult disguised as kindness, a consultant position at Novacode. "You can come back as Director of Innovation," Paul said, with that false corporate cordiality. It wouldn't be the same. As before, of course, but— "Thank you, Paul," Robert interrupted without the energy for indignation. "I'll think about it." He never called back. Pride, that last refuge of the fallen, prevented him from accepting the thinly disguised charity of the man who now commanded his former empire. The following weeks were a blur of bureaucracy, accumulated debts, and desperate negotiations with creditors. The house they lived in, already mortgaged to pay for treatments, was the last to go. Robert and Lucy moved to a tiny apartment in Brixton, London, specialized therapies for the girl, once an unquestionable part of her. Education became an impossible luxury. It was then that a message arrived from Charles Foster, an old college friend who now lived in Manchester. "I'm putting together a team for a new project. We need someone with your experience. It's nothing as grand as what you used to do, but it's honest work and it pays the bills. If you're interested, the spot is yours." For the first time in months, Robert felt a glimmer of hope. He sold what little he had left, packed some of his and his daughter's clothes into 2 worn suitcases, and bought the cheapest tickets he could find to Manchester. What he couldn't know, was that his name had been linked to a scandal that was just beginning to form behind the scenes of power in Washington, D.C. Someone was using his old access credentials to the ministry's systems, and classified information was leaking into the wrong hands. The investigation, still in its initial stages, pointed to a single suspect, Robert Nolan, the former technology entrepreneur, who, according to the evidence, had decided to sell government data to recover his lost assets. As he boarded for what he hoped would be a new beginning, Robert had no idea he was walking directly into a trap, and Clara Miller, the agent assigned to watch him, didn't know she was about to question everything she believed about her job and about the man she was observing from across the airport lounge. Chapter 3. The Washington, D.C. watchdog. Clara Miller had become a federal police agent by conviction, not by chance. Daughter of a detective and a law professor, she grew up in Washington, D.C., hearing stories about justice, duty, and the thin line separating right from legal. At 32, she was already respected in the Intelligence Directorate as a methodical, incorruptible professional, and above all, loyal to protocol. Protocol is what prevents us from becoming what we fight, her father used to say, before Alzheimer's stole his memories and principles. Clara held this maxim as a mantra. 5 days before the encounter at Heathrow Airport, she was called to Director Maurice Adams' office. The grey-haired man with piercing eyes was not known for handing out compliments, but his grave expression that morning indicated something beyond usual seriousness. "Operation Backdoor," he said, sliding a confidential folder across the table. "A data leak from the Department of Defense. Facial recognition algorithms being implemented at the borders. Classified information." Clara quickly flipped through the dossier. Graphs, codes, technical reports on a surveillance system being developed to integrate national security databases. "How much leaked?" she asked, professional as always. "Enough to compromise the security of border operations. Our technicians detected an encrypted device transmitting data from within the department to external servers. We managed to trace the IP to a former consultant, Robert Nolan." The name sounded vaguely familiar. Clara did a quick mental search. "The technology entrepreneur? The one who appeared in magazines?" Maurice nodded, his face hardening. "Former entrepreneur, sold everything a few years ago, briefly worked for the department on a digitalization project, retained access credentials that should have been revoked. MI5 informs us he's been in contact with foreign groups interested in British surveillance technology." Clara frowned, studying Robert Nolan's photo attached to the dossier. A confident-looking man, charismatic smile, intelligent eyes. The image contrasted with the current description provided by the director. A bankrupt, desperate, potentially dangerous individual. "What's my mission?" she asked, closing the folder. "Surveillance and confirmation. Nolan bought tickets to Manchester. We believe he's trying to leave London with the device. You will follow him, confirm he has the item, and prepare the approach." "That's all? Why not arrest him immediately?" The director exchanged a significant look with Agent Miller, who had remained silent in the corner of the room until then. "We suspect he has accomplices," Agent Miller explained, approaching. "We want to see who he contacts, understand the entire network before closing in." Something in the explanation sounded strangely vague, but Clara didn't question it. Protocol. Sometimes field agents shouldn't know all the details. In the next 48 hours, Clara meticulously studied Robert Nolan's profile. His meteoric rise in the technology business world, the sudden sale of his companies, the desperate struggle to save his wife from a rare disease, the dizzying fall that took him from a Richmond mansion to a tiny apartment in Brixton. "Classic profile," Agent Miller commented, supervising the operation. "Quick success, inflated ego, painful fall. These types always think they deserve more than they have. When the opportunity to recover what's theirs appears, they rarely resist." Clara nodded, although something in the simplicity of that analysis bothered her. The reports mentioned a young daughter, diagnosed with autism. His wife had passed away after a long battle with lung disease. Robert Nolan had liquidated all his assets, even personal items of sentimental value, to pay for medical treatments. It wasn't exactly the profile of someone primarily driven by greed. "And the daughter?" Clara asked. "Will she be with him?" Agent Miller shrugged. "Probably. Use that to your advantage if necessary." Something in the coldness of that response disturbed Clara, but she maintained a neutral expression. Professionalism above all. The next day, surveillance began. Robert and his daughter Lucy were located in an economy hotel near the airport. Clara observed from a distance as they checked out. The girl seemed agitated, uncomfortable with the noisy, busy environment. Her father, patient, whispered reassuring words as he adjusted the small pink backpack on her shoulders. In the following hours, she discreetly accompanied the pair to the airport. She saw when the flight was cancelled for the first time, and then a second. She observed Robert's growing frustration and the constant care with which he treated his daughter, always attentive to her specific needs. "Target still at the airport," she reported via communicator. "No sign of the device or contact with third parties." Agent Miller's reply was dry. "Keep watching, maintain distance." But maintaining distance became increasingly difficult. The more she observed Robert and Lucy, the more Clara questioned the profile drawn by the analysts. The man before her showed none of the typical behaviors of someone involved in illicit activities. There were no furtive glances, suspicious calls, secret meetings. Just an exhausted father trying to calm a daughter in an environment hostile to her sensitivities. On the third night, when the flight was cancelled again due to weather conditions, Clara saw an opportunity to approach. The interaction at the coffee machine was brief but revealing. Robert Nolan spoke like someone defeated by life, not like someone with an insidious plan. The way he rushed to comfort his daughter during a sensory meltdown was even more impactful. The low-light, high hug was clearly an intimate code developed to offer the girl security. Criminals didn't create secret languages of affection for their children. They didn't show that kind of selfless devotion. They didn't look at a child with that mixture of love and despair as if she was simultaneously the reason for all effort and the source of all hope. Sitting a few feet away, Clara typed her observations into the encrypted tablet, careful not to include her growing doubts in the official report. Protocol left no room for intuition or empathy, only facts, observable behaviors, concrete evidence. "Connection with Washington, D.C. in 20 minutes, Agent Miller's voice sounded in her earpiece. "Make final contact. Confirm device location." Clara hesitated. "The target appears to be with his daughter in a delicate situation. I suggest postponing the approach." A tense pause preceded the answer. "Negative, Agent Miller. Proceed as planned. I repeat, make final contact." The tone left no room for discussion. Protocol. Clara put away the tablet and prepared for another approach when her cell phone vibrated with an encrypted message. "Device confirmed in target's possession. Prepare for extraction in 30 minutes. The agent frowned. How could they have confirmed this without her verification? Who else was monitoring Robert Nolan? She looked again at the father and daughter across the lounge. Lucy had fallen asleep again in Robert's arms, who was now leafing through a worn photo album. Even from a distance, Clara could see his melancholic gaze as he ran his fingers over images of what appeared to be a previous life. A life of happiness and stability that now existed only on faded photographic paper. It was at that moment that something broke inside the agent. A silent certainty that there was a missing piece in that puzzle, something that would completely transform the final picture. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed an unauthorized message to an old colleague in the digital analysis division. "I need a parallel verification on the backdoor case. Urgent, outside official channels." It was a serious violation of protocol, the kind of action that could cost her career. But for the first time in years, Clara Miller put her intuition above the rules. The answer arrived 7 minutes later, encrypted in a code only the two of them knew. Verification done. There are serious inconsistencies. Original IP tampered with. Target possibly a scapegoat. Be careful, Clara. Her heart raced. If that were true, Robert Nolan was not a criminal, but a victim, and she was about to participate in an injustice that would destroy what remained of his life and, even more seriously, affect an innocent and vulnerable child. Clara looked at the digital clock above the boarding gate. 20 minutes until extraction. 20 minutes to make a decision that would irreversibly change the course of 3 lives, Robert's, Lucy's, and her own. Protocol said to follow orders. But what would her father say before the disease erased his principles? What would truly be just in that situation? With her gaze fixed on the small pink backpack embroidered with unicorns, Clara Miller made her choice. Chapter 4. Conspiracy in Shadows. The rain began to fall over Heathrow Airport, thin and persistent, as if the sky wanted to accompany the melancholy that hung in the air. Robert looked out the wide glass window as Lucy slept in his lap. Drops ran down the glass, distorting the runway lights into colourful blurs that resembled the abstract drawings his daughter made when she was calm. Flight 3547 to Manchester. Attention passengers. Due to improved weather conditions, boarding will begin in 30 minutes. Please proceed to gate 15. The announcement woke Lucy, who stirred restlessly. Robert stroked her hair, mentally preparing for the delicate process of boarding with her. Airports were challenging environments for children with autism, bright lights, loud sounds, unfamiliar people trying to interact, queues, waits, incomprehensible rules. Each step was potentially a trigger for a meltdown. "Are we traveling now, Lulu?" the girl asked in a sleepy voice. "Yes, Princess. We're finally going to our new home. Remember Uncle Charles, whom I showed you in the photo? He's going to help us start over." Lucy nodded, clutching her teddy bear to her chest. "Is Benji coming too?" "Of course. Benji is family." As he organized their small carry-on luggage, Robert noticed the woman he had spoken to earlier. She seemed tense, speaking discreetly on her cell phone while glancing in his direction. There was something in her behavior that triggered an instinctive alarm, a reaction he had developed over years of difficult corporate negotiations. Clara, for her part, was finalizing a crucial call. After receiving confirmation of the inconsistencies in the case, she decided to contact her old mentor at the Federal Police Academy, retired Superintendent Vance. In a few coded words, she explained the situation and requested an urgent check of internal records. "Miller, what you're suggesting is serious." Vance's hoarse voice sounded worried. "We're talking about possible manipulation of evidence." "I know, sir. That's why I need independent confirmation before I act. I have less than 20 minutes. There was a heavy silence on the line before the former superintendent replied, "I'll check. Stay on the line." Clara kept her gaze fixed on Robert, who was now helping Lucy put on her trainers. The girl made repetitive hand movements, a common self-regulating behavior in autistic children when anxious. Her father, patient, waited for her to finish before moving on to the next step. "Miller," Vance's voice returned, now graver. "I accessed the records. The initial device was identified in the department's security system 3 weeks ago, correct?" "Positive. The access was not made with Nolan's credentials. They were active credentials of an internal user." Clara's heart raced. "So how did his name appear in the investigation?" "Someone manually inserted it. I found the record of the alteration. A user with administrative access level modified the logs to incriminate Nolan." "Who?" Another silence, longer this time. "A user registered as PM Miller." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. Miller, the same agent supervising the operation, the same man who had insisted so much on immediate action, even with a vulnerable child involved. "There's more," Vance continued. "I looked for connections between Miller and Nolan. I found something interesting. Paul Miller was a minority shareholder of Novacode before Nolan sold it. It seems he tried to increase his stake during Nolan's financial crisis, but was passed over in favor of another investor." The pieces began to fall into place in Clara's mind. A personal vendetta disguised as an official investigation, an agent abusing his position to incriminate a past adversary, and Robert Nolan, already devastated by life, about to be completely destroyed by a conspiracy he didn't even understand. "Thank you, sir. I know what I need to do now." "Miller," Vance's voice sounded worried. "Be careful. If Miller finds out you know—" "Understood, don't worry." Clara hung up and looked at her watch. 15 minutes until extraction. 15 minutes to prevent an injustice. She crossed the lounge with determined steps towards Robert and Lucy. As she approached, she could see surprise and a slight apprehension in the man's eyes. "Hello again," she said, trying to sound casual. "Looks like we're finally boarding." Robert nodded, cautious. Yes, finally. Clara took a deep breath. There was no time for subtleties. "Mr. Nolan, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't react. You are in danger." Robert's eyes widened for an instant before he managed to control his expression. "Who are you?" Clara discreetly showed her badge. "Agent Clara Miller, Federal Police. I'm not your enemy. But there are other agents here who believe you're involved in a data leak from the Department of Defense." "That's absurd," Robert whispered, instinctively pulling Lucy closer. "I have nothing to do with it." "I know," Clara replied, looking around to make sure they weren't being watched. "I believe you're being framed. Someone with internal access to the systems manipulated evidence to make it look like you're guilty." "Why? I have nothing left. I lost everything. What sense would that make?" "Paul Miller, does that name mean anything to you?" Robert's face paled. "Paul? My former partner? He's involved in this?" "He works for the Federal Police now. He's the supervisor of this operation. And I found out he tampered with evidence to incriminate you." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. When he opened them again, there was a mixture of understanding and anger. He always wanted Nova Code for himself. When I sold my shares, I offered them to him first, but I demanded that the original team be kept. He didn't accept, so I sold to an international consortium. He never forgave me for that. Lucy, sensing her father's tension, began to stir. "Daddy, light too bright," she murmured, partially covering her eyes. Robert immediately shifted his focus to his daughter. "Low light, high hug, Lulu, it's okay." Clara looked at her watch. 10 minutes. "Mr. Nolan, federal agents with orders to arrest you will soon swarm this area. I need to get you out of here now." "And why should I trust you?" he asked, distrust evident in his voice. "Because I'm the only chance you have. And because I know you wouldn't risk your daughter's well-being. If I were lying, why would I warn you? I could simply let them arrest you." Robert looked at Lucy, who was now swaying slightly back and forth, her self-comforting movement when she felt anxiety rise. The thought of his daughter witnessing his arrest, being separated from him, perhaps sent to some institution while the case was investigated. It was unbearable. "What do you suggest?" he finally asked. "There's a service exit near the restrooms. I can take you there. I have a car waiting. We need to leave before Miller's team arrives." As she spoke, Clara's phone vibrated. A message from Miller. "Team en route. Stay on site. Prepare target." "We don't have much time," she said, putting her phone away. "We need to go now." Robert hesitated only a moment before grabbing the pink backpack and the small carry-on bag. "Lulu, we need to play a game. We're going to follow the lady and be very quiet, like spies. Can you be a spy for Daddy?" To Clara's surprise, the girl smiled, seeming to understand the game. "Spies have secret missions," Lucy said, surprisingly articulate when the subject interested her. "Exactly, and our mission is to follow quietly." Clara guided them along an indirect path, avoiding the security cameras she knew well. Robert followed closely, holding Lucy's hand, murmuring reassuring words when they passed through busier or noisier areas. As they approached the service exit, Clara saw Miller entering the main lounge through the reflection in a glass panel. He was accompanied by 4 plainclothes agents, all with the unmistakable posture of police officers on a mission. "Now," she whispered, pushing a door marked "Employees Only." A narrow corridor led to a loading and unloading area, where service vehicles parked to supply the airport's shops and restaurants. "My car is right there," Clara indicated, pointing to an unmarked silver Duster. As they hurried through the service parking lot, Robert noticed something that made him stop. "Wait, how did you know?" "Knew what?" Clara asked, nervous about the sudden stop. "How did you know my former company was sold to an international consortium and not to Paul? That's not public information." Clara's brown eyes met his. "Because I did my homework. I read your full dossier, including financial details that weren't released. And because, unlike Miller, I still believe in investigating before condemning. Before Robert could reply, a voice echoed from the parking lot entrance. Agent Miller. Paul Miller stood 30 feet away, accompanied by 2 agents. His normally controlled expression now showed barely suppressed rage. Step away from the suspect, Miller. That's a direct order. Clara positioned herself between Miller and Robert. He's not a suspect, Miller. He's a scapegoat, and I know why. You're compromised, Miller. Step away now or you'll be considered an accomplice. Accomplice? Clara gave a bitter laugh. You tampered with evidence to incriminate an innocent man. A man you know from the past. A man against whom you have a personal vendetta. Paul Miller's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Paul Miller, minority shareholder of Novacode, passed over when Robert sold his stake. Now using your position in the federal police for personal revenge, I know exactly what I'm talking about. A tense silence fell over the parking lot. The other agents exchanged confused glances, clearly not expecting this confrontation. Daddy, I'm scared, Lucy whispered, hiding behind her father's legs. It was the child's voice that seemed to change something in the atmosphere. One of the agents accompanying Paul Miller stepped forward. Sir, perhaps we should review procedures. There's a child involved. Paul Miller ignored the comment, stepping forward. This is the last time, Miller. Step away from the suspect. Clara didn't move. On the contrary, she drew her weapon and pointed it at the ground, not a direct threat, but an unequivocal statement of her position. No, Miller. You're going to hear what I have to say, and everyone else here will too. Chapter 5. The Truth Exposed. The tension in the airport parking lot was palpable. The rain was falling, harder now, creating a curtain of water that isolated the small group from the rest of the world. The streetlights reflected in the puddles, illuminating tense and confused faces. All of you are being used, Clara continued, maintaining her protective stance between Paul Miller and the Nolan family. This man is not a criminal. He is a victim of evidence manipulation. The agents accompanying Paul Miller exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, younger, with his badge discreetly visible under his jacket, stepped forward. Agent Miller, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof of what you're saying? Ryan, don't be an idiot, Paul Miller interrupted. She's obviously emotionally compromised. I have proof, Clara affirmed, without taking her eyes off Paul Miller. Superintendent Vance verified the internal records. Access to the system was not made with Nolan's credentials, but with active credentials of an internal user. The logs were subsequently altered by a user identified as PM Miller. Paul Miller's face paled for an instant before he regained his composure. That's ridiculous. Vance is retired. He doesn't have access to the systems. He still has friends in the department, Clara replied. And unlike you, he still follows the principles the federal police should represent. Lucy, startled by the raised voices, began to whimper softly, swaying back and forth. Robert knelt beside her, whispering reassuring words. Look at them, Clara said, indicating father and daughter. Is this the great criminal you came to arrest? A single father caring for an autistic child? A man who lost everything trying to save his wife? What kind of threat to national security is this? Don't be fooled, Paul Miller retorted, his voice betraying a slight tremor. Appearances can be deceiving. He may seem harmless now, but what, Miller? Clara interrupted. Or should I call you? Paul? How many here know that you've known Robert Nolan from before? That you tried to buy his company when he was desperate? One of the more experienced agents, Sanders, frowned. Is that true, Miller? Irrelevant, Paul Miller replied dryly. We're here for a matter of national security, not because of private business from the past. Nothing irrelevant when you use your position for a personal vendetta, Clara countered. Then, addressing the other agents, did you verify the evidence yourselves, or did you just follow orders? What is the protocol for independent verification in high-sensitivity cases? The words hit the right spot. Sanders, known for his procedural rigor, visibly hesitated. Sanders, don't tell me you're considering her crazy talk, Paul Miller said, his tone now more nervous. It's not crazy talk. Robert's voice sounded firm, despite the situation. He stood up, still keeping a protective hand on Lucy's shoulder. Paul was always obsessed with control. When we founded Novacode, he tried several times to change the company's direction against the team's wishes. When I needed to sell my stake, he offered an absurdly low amount on the condition of firing half of the original employees. I refused and sold. To a consortium that kept the jobs. Paul Miller took a threatening step towards Robert, but Sanders placed a hand on his chest, restraining him. "He's lying!" Paul Miller shouted. "This story has nothing to do with the investigation." "Then why are you so agitated?" Clara questioned. "If there's nothing to hide, why does the mention of your past affect you so much?" The young agent, Ryan, pulled out his phone. "I'm checking the records right now." "No!" Paul Miller tried to stop him, but Sanders, now clearly suspicious, blocked his way. "Miller, control yourself. If there's nothing to hide, there's no problem checking." At that moment, Sanders' radio crackled. An authoritative voice sounded. "Agents, attention. Operation Backdoor suspended by order of the superintendents. I repeat, operation suspended. Return immediately to headquarters." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain and Lucy's low whimpers, still disturbed by the tense situation. "What does that mean?" Ryan asked, confused. "It means someone at the top just found out what Miller was doing," Clara replied, finally lowering her weapon. "Vance must have activated his contacts. The operation is being reviewed." Paul Miller remained motionless, his face a mask of contained fury. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strangely calm. "This isn't over, Nolan, nor for you, Miller." Sanders stepped forward, taking control of the situation. "Agent Miller, hand over your weapon and badge. You are temporarily suspended until this situation is clarified." "You have no authority for that," Paul Miller growled. "As a senior agent in the absence of an immediate superior, yes, I do," Sanders replied, impassive. "Don't make me repeat myself." For a tense moment, everyone thought Paul Miller would react. But after a few seconds, he slowly removed his holster and handed over his weapon, followed by his badge. His gaze, however, remained filled with hostility. "Mr. Nolan," Sanders said, turning to Robert, "I apologize for the inconvenience. You are not under arrest, but we will need your statement to clarify this situation. Would you be willing to accompany us voluntarily to the superintendent's?" Before Robert could answer, Lucy began to scream, covering her ears with her hands. The prolonged tension had finally triggered a full sensory meltdown. Robert immediately knelt to calm her, but this time the reassuring words didn't seem to work. "She can't go to a police station," Clara said, approaching, the father and daughter. "Look at her. This environment is already excessively stimulating. A federal police headquarters would be unbearable." Sanders observed the child in crisis and nodded slowly. "I understand. Mr. Nolan, are you willing to cooperate at another time?" "Yes, of course," Robert replied, still trying to calm Lucy. "I want this clarified as much as you do, but right now I need to take care of my daughter." "I'll take responsibility for him," Clara said, to everyone's surprise, including her own. "I know a place where they can stay safe until everything is resolved, and I guarantee he'll be available to give a statement when needed." Sanders considered the proposal for a moment before nodding. "Very well, Agent Miller. I will trust your judgment, but I expect a full report on my desk by tomorrow noon." "Yes, sir." "As for you, Miller, you're coming with us now," Sanders ordered, gesturing for Ryan to escort him. Paul Miller cast one last venomous look at Robert and Clara before being led away. "This won't stand," he muttered as he passed them. When the agents left, taking Paul Miller with them, Clara felt her shoulders relax slightly. She turned to Robert, who was still trying to calm Lucy. "How is she?" she asked, kneeling beside them. "Overwhelmed," Robert replied, concern evident on his face. "We need to get out of here. Find a quiet place." "Come with me," Clara said, standing up and picking up Robert's small bag. "My apartment isn't far from here. It's a quiet place without much visual or auditory stimulation. You can rest there until we decide what to do." Robert looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Clara reflected for a moment before answering. "Because I almost made a terrible mistake today. I almost destroyed an innocent family's life by blindly following orders without questioning. I don't know if I could live with that. Robert nodded slowly, understanding. Carefully, he picked Lucy up, who was still trembling and shaking her head rhythmically, her self-comforting mechanism. As they walked towards Clara's car, the rain began to subside. The clouds parted, revealing a star-dotted night sky. A convenient metaphor for what had just happened, Clara thought, the storm passing, the truth emerging. On the way to her apartment, Clara watched the father and daughter in the rearview mirror. Robert had covered Lucy with his own jacket, creating a kind of cocoon that reduced sensory stimulation. He whispered to her continuously, simple stories about a better future awaiting them. Gradually, the girl calmed down, eventually falling completely asleep. "You're very good with her," Clara commented in a low voice. Robert smiled tiredly. "I had to learn to be. After Catherine left, it was just the two of us against the world. And the world is rarely kind to people like Lucy. You could have left her with her grandparents, moved on alone. It would have been easier." "Easier? Maybe," Robert admitted, "but it wouldn't be right. She's my daughter, my responsibility, my everything now. No matter how difficult it gets, we'll be together." Something in those words touched Clara deeply. In her years with the federal police, she had seen so many people abandon their responsibilities, so many parents neglect their children in search of personal comfort. Robert's devotion was something rare and precious. "You're going to be okay, you know," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Tonight was terrible, but it's over. Miller will be investigated. The truth will come out." "And then?" Robert asked, his gaze lost in the urban landscape passing by the window. "I have nothing, Clara. No money, no home, no guaranteed job. How will I take care of her?" Clara thought for a moment before answering. "One step at a time. First, we'll ensure your safety. Then we'll see what can be done. I have some contacts who might be able to help." The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence. When they arrived at the modest building where Clara lived, Lucy was still sleeping soundly. Robert carefully carried her, following Clara, to the elevator. The apartment was small but organized and welcoming. Walls in soft tones, few decorative objects, indirect lighting. Inadvertently, Clara had created an environment quite suitable for a child with sensory sensitivities. "You can use the guest room," she indicated. "It's not big, but the bed is comfortable." Robert nodded gratefully and took Lucy to the indicated room. Clara took the opportunity to prepare some tea in the small kitchen. While the water boiled, she sent a message to Vance updating him on the situation and thanking him for his intervention. The reply came almost immediately. "You did the right thing, Miller. Miller is being interrogated now. Apparently he didn't act alone. More people are involved. Take care of our protected witnesses. We'll talk tomorrow." "More people involved?" Clara frowned, intrigued. Who else would have an interest in framing a bankrupt businessman? When Robert returned to the living room, Clara offered him a cup of tea. "Is she okay?" she asked. "Yes, completely asleep. Days like this exhaust her." He accepted the tea with a tired smile. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Clara replied, sitting on the sofa. "This is far from over." Miller mentioned he didn't act alone. "We need to find out who else is involved and why." Robert sat in the opposite armchair, his expression turning serious. "I have a theory about that." Clara leaned forward, interested. "I'm listening." Chapter 6. New Beginnings. The teacup warmed Robert's hands as he organized his thoughts. Clara's apartment, with its soft lighting and minimalist decor, offered a strange sense of security after the chaotic past 72 hours. "When I sold Nova Code," he began, "it wasn't just Paul who was dissatisfied. There was another interested party, George Maxwell, owner of Tech Global. The cybersecurity." "Defense giant?" Clara asked, immediately alert. "Exactly. Tech Global wanted to absorb our pattern recognition algorithms. They offered a lot of money, but their intentions weren't good. They supplied systems to governments with questionable human rights records. I refused the offer. and sold to a European consortium with ethical principles more aligned with mine. And you think George could be behind all this? Paul and George were always close, Robert explained. During my work at the department, I discovered that Tech Global was competing to provide the new border surveillance system. My technical report was not favorable to them. I identified security flaws that could compromise classified data. Clara quickly typed some notes into her phone. That makes sense. Miller would have access to the federal police's internal systems. George would have the motive and the resources for such an operation. A perfect scapegoat, Robert murmured. The bankrupt former entrepreneur, desperate for money, selling secrets to save himself. I'll need to report this immediately, Clara said, standing up. If George Maxwell is truly involved, this goes far beyond a personal vendetta. It's a matter of national security and corporate corruption. While Clara made a call in the next room, Robert walked to the window. London stretched before him, a sea of lights dotting the darkness. Somewhere on that horizon was his past, the office in Canary Wharf, the house in Richmond, the elegant restaurants where he closed multi-million-pound deals. All of it seemed to belong to another life, another person. A slight noise caught his attention. Lucy was standing at the bedroom door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy?" she called, her voice small and uncertain. Robert immediately went to her, kneeling to be at her eye level. "Hi, Princess. Did you sleep well?" The girl nodded, looking around with curiosity. "Where are we?" "At a friend's house. She's helping us." "Are we going to Manchester tomorrow?" Robert hesitated. With everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if they should still follow the original plan. "I don't know, Lulu. Maybe we need to stay in London for a few more days." To his surprise, Lucy didn't protest. Instead, she approached the window, fascinated by the city lights. "It's pretty," she commented, her small hand pressed against the glass. "Yes, it's pretty," Robert agreed, watching his daughter with infinite love. Even in the darkest moments, she found beauty. Clara returned to the living room, her face showing a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Seeing Lucy awake, she smiled. "Hello, Lucy. I'm Clara. Did you sleep well?" The girl didn't respond directly, still watching the lights through the window. Robert explained in a low voice, "She doesn't always respond to direct questions from strangers. It's not personal." Clara nodded understandingly. "No problem. I have news," she continued, addressing Robert. "Vance confirmed they are investigating connections between Miller and Tech Global. They found suspicious transfers to an offshore account linked to him." "What about us?" Robert asked, indicating himself and his daughter. "You are officially under federal police protection until everything is clarified. Tomorrow an agent will come to take your formal statement right here. We thought it best to avoid taking Lucy to a stressful environment." Robert let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Clara said, her tone more serious. "The investigation will be long. You may need to testify eventually. And George Maxwell is a powerful man, with connections everywhere." "I'm used to fighting giants," Robert replied with a tired smile. "I used to be one of them, remember?" A comfortable silence settled as both watched Lucy, who had now found a small aquarium on Clara's shelf and was observing it with fascination. "She likes fish," Robert commented. "Something about the movement of the water and the colors. It calms her." "I have 3 neons and a betta," Clara explained, approaching the girl. "The blue one is named Bubbles. The others don't have names yet." Lucy looked at Clara for the first time, her eyes showing genuine interest. "Can I name them?" "Of course," Clara replied, surprised and touched by the unexpected interaction. "What names do you suggest?" "Sparkle, Splash, and Hug." Robert chuckled softly. "Hug is an interesting name for a fish." Lucy looked at her father with that seriousness only children can express. "Fish hug with their eyes, Daddy. Everyone knows that." Something in the innocence of that explanation deeply touched both adults. Clara felt her eyes well up, while Robert swallowed hard, moved. "Hug is a perfect name," Clara agreed, kneeling beside the girl. "You're very clever, you know." Lucy smiled shyly before returning her attention to the fish. In the hours that followed, a strange normalcy settled in the small apartment. Clara improvised a simple dinner with what she had in the fridge. Robert helped set the table. Lucy, surprisingly at ease in this new environment, calmly drew on some sheets of paper Clara offered. As they washed the dishes after the meal, Robert broke the silence. "Why did you do all this? Risked your career, your reputation? For us?" Clara continued, drying a plate longer than necessary before answering. "My father was a detective. He always said the badge wasn't about power, but about protection. We protect the innocent, not the system," he would repeat. "He sounds like he was a good man." "The best I knew," she confirmed, with a melancholic smile. "Alzheimer's took him 2 years ago. In the last few months he didn't recognize me anymore, but until the end, he talked about justice and protection." "He'd be proud," Robert said simply. "I hope so." The next morning brought quick changes. Vance arrived early, accompanied by a discreet team. Robert's statement was meticulously recorded. Digital evidence was collected. Old emails, documents from the period he worked at the department, everything that could clarify the plot. "Miller is cooperating," Vance informed during a break. "He's implicating George Maxwell in exchange for a reduced sentence. The operation was bigger than we imagined. They intended to use you as a scapegoat while Tech Global took control of the border surveillance system." "And now?" Clara asked. "What happens to Robert and Lucy?" "For now, full protection. We have a safe apartment where you can stay until the dust settles," Vance explained, addressing Robert. "After that, well, I think you'll have some interesting proposals." "What do you mean?" Robert asked, confused. The Department of Science and Technology was impressed when they heard the full story. "Your old report on Tech Global's system flaws probably saved the public treasury millions and protected sensitive data. They're interested in hiring you as a permanent consultant." "A job?" Robert seemed incredulous. "A real job? With a salary commensurate with your experience and benefits that include special assistance for Lucy," Vance added, with a rare smile. Robert had to sit down, stunned by the turn of events. After so long struggling just to survive, the prospect of stability seemed almost unreal. "And that's not all," Vance continued. "The European consortium that bought your company heard about the case. Apparently they never found anyone who understood the algorithms as well as you. They're offering a consultant position, remote work, so you can stay in the UK with your daughter." "2 job offers?" Robert laughed, incredulous. "A week ago I couldn't afford a cheap hotel." "Life has its twists and turns," Vance commented, standing up. "Clara, can we talk privately?" While the 2 police officers talked in the hallway, Robert went to the room where Lucy was quietly playing with some colorful blocks Clara had lent her. He knelt beside his daughter, observing the meticulous construction she was making. "Lulu, it looks like things are going to change for us." "Are we staying in London?" she asked, without taking her eyes off her work. "Yes, we're staying. And Daddy's going to have a new job, a good job." "With the fish lady?" Robert smiled. "Not exactly, but I think we'll see her quite a lot." Lucy considered the information for a moment before nodding, apparently satisfied. "She gives good hugs, like Mummy used to." The unexpected comparison caught Robert by surprise, bringing tears to his eyes. Lucy rarely talked about Catherine. "Yes, Princess, she gives good hugs." In the hallway, Vance handed Clara an envelope. "Your transfer to the Cybercrime Division has been approved. You start on Monday." "But I didn't ask for a transfer," she protested, confused. "No, but you demonstrated exactly the kind of critical thinking and integrity we need there. This operation exposed serious vulnerabilities in our digital evidence investigation protocols. We need people who question, who don't blindly follow orders." Clara opened the envelope, quickly reading the official documents. It was a promotion, in fact. More responsibility, better pay, the chance to reformulate procedures. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep doing the right thing, even when it's difficult." Vance paused, looking towards the room where Robert and Lucy were, talking. "They'll need someone during the transition, someone they trust." "I'm available to help in any way necessary," Clara replied promptly. I'm sure you are, Vance said with an enigmatic smile before saying goodbye. 3 months later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Clara parked her car in front of a quiet park in West London. It was a space specially designed for children with special needs, with sensory areas and adapted structures. On the bench near the swings, Robert waited for her with a smile. "She's loving the new therapist," he commented when Clara sat beside him. "She said she wants to be a fish scientist when she grows up." "Marine biologist?" Clara laughed. "Excellent choice." They watched Lucy interacting with another child in the sandbox. There were visible improvements in her socialization, small, gradual, but significant. "Work at the department is going well," Robert continued. "It's strange to be on the other side, overseeing contracts instead of seeking them, but I feel like I'm doing something important." "You are," Clara confirmed. "The system you helped implement has already identified 3 attempted breaches in the last 2 months. And how are things in the new division?" "Intense. We're rewriting digital evidence verification protocols. The experience with your case showed us many flaws in the system." Robert looked at her with gratitude. "You know, I spent so much time trying to rebuild what I lost that I didn't realize I was stuck in the past. It took almost being unjustly arrested to understand that I needed to look forward, not back." "And how is that looking forward going?" Clara asked, her tone more personal than professional. "Scary, exciting, necessary." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "By the way, Lucy asked if you'd like to have dinner with us on Friday. She wants to show you the new aquarium we set up." "I'd love to," Clara replied, smiling. "Wouldn't miss it for anything." A shout of joy caught both their attention. Lucy waved enthusiastically, inviting them to see something she had discovered in the sand. They walked together towards her, 2 adults who found each other in the most improbable circumstances, united by the desire to protect a special child and by the conviction that doing the right thing, even when difficult, was the only possible path. On London's horizon, life continued its frantic pace. Companies were born and failed. Fortunes were made and lost. Power changed hands. But there, in that small park, 3 people rediscovered something far more valuable than any corporate empire: the possibility of starting anew, of building something new on the rubble of what was lost. When Lucy took Clara's hand without hesitation, inviting her to see the sandcastle she had built, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: the feeling that, despite all challenges, the future could be bright. Not the future of wealth and recognition he had once aimed for, but a future of true connections, genuine purpose, and, above, whole love. "Low light, high hug," Lucy whispered as she spontaneously hugged Clara, surprising both the police officer and her father. "Low light, high hug," Clara repeated, returning the hug with tears in her eyes, finally understanding the true meaning of that secret code. In moments of darkness, what truly matters is the human warmth we find in each other. Dear listeners, we hope Robert and Lucy's story has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours in creating it. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other narratives that explore the new beginnings and second chances that life offers us. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this story about protection, justice, and new beginnings moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of British life and the bonds that unite us as human beings. We await your comments to know which moment touched you the most.